Good morning and welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are here this morning for a hearing in docket number 2023-1-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, Chair Belser, and with us virtually we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Caston. I'll recognize Staff Counsel Ms. Sandra Moser to read the docket, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, commissioners and parties. We are here today for the proceeding in docket number 2023-1-E, which is the annual review of base rates for fuel costs of Duke Energy Progress, LLC, for a potential increase or decrease in fuel adjustment. The proceeding has been scheduled for today, June 27th, 2023 at 10 a.m. All parties participating in this matter are available and the docket is in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moser. Let's take appearances from the parties. Who's representing Duke Energy Progress, LLC?
Good morning, Chair Belser, Vice Chair Powers, members of the commission. I'm Katie Brown. I'm in-house counsel for Duke Energy Progress. Here with me this morning is Lyle Trawick. He's outside counsel for the company with the law firm Robinson Gray.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Representing Nucor Steel, South Carolina.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, Rob Smith and Mike Levanga.
Good morning. Thank you. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Good morning, Chair Belser. This is Kate Mixon on behalf of SACE and CCL, and with me here today is Emma Clancy.
Thank you, Ms. Mixon. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Chair Belser, members of the Commission. Donna Rainey on behalf of ORS, and with me today is Ben Mushton.
Thank you, Ms. Rainey. Any preliminary matters before we begin today?
Chair Belser, we do have one preliminary matter.
Ms. Brown?
I think I have this on now. Chair Belser, yesterday afternoon we notified the parties and staff counsel for the commission that one of the company's witnesses, Jeff Flanagan, would need to appear virtually today instead of testifying in person due to illness. To that end, if it suits the commission and the other parties, we do have some changes to our witness order. We'd like to put up Mr. Flanagan first since he's testifying virtually, and he'd be testifying individually. And following Mr. Flanagan, we'd like to present witnesses Simrel, McClay, and Houston as a panel. And then our final panel of witnesses, Ms. Dana Harrington, Wendy Fleener, and Keitha Hibbert would remain unchanged.
Any objection from the parties on reordering of Duke's witnesses? Hearing no objection, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chair Belser.
I want to ask counsel for some clarification, please. I understand through the letter that you filed with Ms. And I'm pointing to you, Ms. Brown, the letter you filed with Ms. Harrington's rebuttal testimony, and and we are aware that ORS is conducting an investigation on Winter Storm Elliott. And I want to be clear before we begin this proceeding. Is that an ongoing investigation where any expenses or costs that are associated with Winter Storm Elliott will not be reviewed in this proceeding, but in a subsequent proceeding, or are we going forward with those today?
Madam Chair, So yes, there is an ongoing investigation into Winter Storm Elliott. So it's kind of a two-pronged approach. So Dr. Maria Rumpani, who will be testifying on behalf of ORS later today, she investigated what impact, if any, Winter Storm Elliott had as it pertains to fuel. With respect to, I believe it's a non-docketed item, but I could be remembering that incorrectly, but there's an ongoing investigation just generally as to the operations of the company with respect to what occurred during that period of time, if that makes sense.
Well, I reckon my question is, if that investigation is still ongoing, and ORS usually in these proceedings has some sort of catch-all, or that any outages or that have or where there's not been a final report or the investigation of the outage is still ongoing, that they reserve the right to review those in the next fuel proceeding. Is that correct? Something along those lines?
I believe with respect to outages, which typically would be discussed by Mr. Amari Thompson, I don't think that Winter Storm Elliott would affect, in the review, would affect the fuel costs in this proceeding, is my understanding. So in other words,
is that y'all's understanding? Because in the letter, Ms. Brown, you indicated that ORS's investigation remains ongoing, and I'm referring to the letter of June 13th that accompanied the filing of witness Harrington's rebuttal testimony. The companies do not intend to file rebuttal testimony in response to Dr. Rupani's direct testimony. Companies do not waive any arguments and respectfully reserve the rights to address this matter in full at the appropriate time.
Right, Chair Belzer. We did not file any rebuttal testimony in response to Dr. Rumpani's testimony. As I understand her testimony, neither she nor any ORS witnesses have proposed any disallowances in this case. I understand that the investigation into Winter Storm Elliott is into a number of aspects separate and apart from the fuel costs. So we just thought that those issues would be better addressed in that docket.
So fuel costs will be addressed in this matter.
That is
and
my
not held
understanding,
over.
Chair Belzer.
So your witnesses are going to be able to answer questions from the commissioners regarding those matters?
About the outages or
and
derates?
fuel cost?
Yes, Chair Belzer.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure we're all on the same page where we're going. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Chair Belzer, thank you. The company would first call Mr. Jeff Flanagan to testify.
Hey, and I hope you can see and hear me.
Hey, we can hear you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Court reporter will swear the witness, please.
Mr. Flanagan, if you could raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Flanagan. Would you please state your name for the record?
Yeah, my name is Jeff Flanagan.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy Business Services as the general manager of Carolina's dispatchable generation, the West Zone. That includes Marshall Steam Station, Allen Steam Station, Asheville and W.S. Lee Combined Cycle Station, and Clemson CHP.
How long have you worked in the fossil hydro solar industry?
Approximately 21 years.
What's your educational background?
I graduated from NC State with a degree in paper science and engineering, as well as chemistry. I have a master's in business from the University of South Carolina. I'm also a registered professional engineer from the state of South Carolina.
Can you please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding?
Yes, I was hired on originally through Progress Energy as the FGD, so flue gas desulfurization engineer. I've held various roles of increasing responsibility since that time, supervisor to operations and maintenance superintendent at Marshall, then up through projects and eventually the station manager at Smith Energy Complex, and then the station manager at Marshall and Allen before leading into my current role this past February.
Can you please describe your responsibilities at the company?
Yes, I'm responsible for the overall direction and management of about 4,000 megawatts in Carolina's dispatchable generation in coal combined cycle and peaking generation, provide strategic direction and leadership to the station general managers, including the day-to-day operations, business analysts, any kind of process development, O&M or capital budget allocation, outage performance, also responsible for operational excellence throughout the organization and continuous improvement and benchmarking.
How long have you been in your current role?
Since February this year.
Chair Belzer, given Mr. Flanagan's extensive experience, I move to qualify him as an expert in the field of non-nuclear power plant operations.
Any objections or questions regarding the witness's expertise? Tell me again, non-nuclear?
Non-nuclear power plant operations.
Right. Mr. Flanagan will be accepted as a expert witness in the field of non-nuclear power generation. Is that right?
I said power plant operations.
Operations, thank you. I don't write as fast as I used to. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair Belzer. Mr. Flanagan, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 11 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would ask that Mr. Flanagan's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Flanagan's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Flanagan, would you please provide a summary of your direct testimony at this time?
Yes, I can. Would you like for me to read it?
Yes, please.
Okay. The purpose of my testimony is to describe Duke Energy Progress's non-nuclear generation portfolio and changes made since the 2022 fuel proceeding. Discuss the performance of DEP's non-nuclear generation facilities from March 1st, 2022 through February 28th of 2023. Provide information on significant non-nuclear outages that have occurred during the review period and discuss DEP's environmental compliance efforts. DEP's non-nuclear generation portfolio consists of 8,954 megawatts of generating capacity, which includes 3,143 megawatts of coal-fired generation, 2,408 megawatts of natural gas combustion turbine generation, 3,079 megawatts of natural gas combined cycle generation, 228 megawatts of hydroelectric generation, 87 megawatts of solar dependable capacity, and 4 megawatts of battery storage. The company's generating units operated efficiently and reliably during the review period. Most units had at least one short planned outage during the review period to inspect and maintain plant equipment. During the review period, DEP's total system generation was around 60 million megawatt hours, of which approximately 52% was provided by the non-nuclear fleet. That breakdown includes a 40% contribution from gas facilities, an 11% contribution from coal-fired stations, 1% from hydro, and 0.4% from solar facilities. DEP has installed pollution control equipment on coal-fired units as well as new generation resources to meet various current reduction requirements for NOx and SO2 emissions. The type and quantity of emissions-reducing chemicals varies depending on the generation output, the chemical constituents in the fuel burned, and or the level of emission reduction required. The goal is to effectively comply with emissions regulations and provide the optimal total cost operating solution. DEP will continue to leverage new technologies and chemicals to meet present and future emissions requirements. This concludes my summary testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Chair Belzer, Mr. Flanagan is now available to answer any questions from council or the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Newcourt Steele?
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy?
No questions, Chair Belzer.
Office of Regulatory Staff?
No questions, Chair Belzer.
Commissioners? Commissioners, questions for this witness?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Caston?
Sorry, I thought my video was on. I apologize. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan.
Good morning.
With your, I guess, position background, you're I assume you're the one that could answer these questions the best. And I guess just for my edification, does the company, in your opinion, use its units in the most efficient way possible?
I do believe we do. For one, our dispatch order plays into that some, right? So we look at heat rate and efficiency of the units to rank them for what units run as load picks up. So that process is done by system operations, but the way at which we run them, we're running the least cost unit at any given time.
Okay. Are there ever times when the company must run its units uneconomically?
Not that I can think of offhand. There may be times, and this week, you think about the process that coal plays nowadays. Their mission has kind of changed over time. They're more of I'm gonna say short-term peaking, right? So not short-term in a day, but if you're looking at higher periods of increased load over time, you may keep coal units on because you're going to need that through some 4 or 5 day window. But even in that regard, I don't know that it's necessarily uneconomical or inefficient. It's just a way of maintaining the balance for system load.
Well, if I think what I'm understanding as far as the coal units now, whereas if I understood it in previous, I guess, hearings or comments, questions, is that I guess typically either they used to be or are they were ran more for a base load, and what you're saying now is it's more of a short-term use rather than more as a base load. Is that correct?
That's fair. And each unit kind of has its own place, and where they fall within the dispatch order. Talking across the fleet, not just DEP. If you look at DEP and DEC, the supercritical units have more of that base look to them. They stay online pretty consistently. Maybe down on load and then would ramp up during the days, as opposed to most of the subcritical units really are more shorter term, winter, summer, or periods in the spring and fall where there's unexpected weather patterns or something like that. So, each unit's kind of got its own purpose, and you see that in the way system operations, the unit cost priority, where you look at the cost to run that unit, you can kind of see that.
Okay, thank you. And I think I heard you say earlier that the company dispatches plants, I guess, based on the least cost or what's the most economical. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So does the company follow the same policies when dispatching, say, base load versus reserves?
Yes. So, that takes minimum loads into account. Some coal units can't turn down as much as others. So when you're looking at reserves, it also takes some of the minimum loads into account. But yes, that's correct.
I have a few other questions, but I'll save them. Are you feeling better this morning?
Marginally. Thanks for asking.
I'm glad. You look well, and I appreciate you taking time to answer those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Caston. Commissioners, Commissioner Williams, is that your light? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan.
Hey, good morning.
So it's fair to say you run the non-nuclear power plants?
I run about a fourth of the non-nuclear power plants. So Carolina's dispatchable generation is the non-nuclear, non-renewable So no solar and battery. So the traditional generation, coal, gas, and we have all of the Carolinas, both North and South Carolina. And there are 4 of us that are zone managers that all of the plants are kind of divided up into. It's probably about a fourth of the generation that I manage.
All right. Well, tell me what that means. I have an idea of what it means to run a power plant, but what do you do on a day-to-day basis, on an average day?
Prepare a lot for meetings like this. So most of what to me, our highest priority job is, we are measuring risk every day. There are really across the board, whether at a combined cycle plant or a coal generating facility, there's equipment that, maybe a primary failed and you're running on a backup. Maybe there's vibration that it could lead to a failure. So you review a lot of operating data and you measure risk to see, what needs to be worked on sooner rather than later, where investment needs to go. There's a lot of longer term strategies. So, we work on 1, 2, out to 5-year capital investment plans. So a lot of that goes into, long-term equipment reliability. So we have a lot of meetings with engineers that talk about equipment reliability. So it's some short-term, day-to-day what we need to work on, but really more for me, longer-term strategic. The managers that I have at the sites specifically do a good job of focusing on the day-to-day. I get involved when decisions need to be made and things like that.
So you're more involved in the strategic level than the tactical level. Is that fair?
That's fair.
So tell me what's over the horizon in some of your 1 to 5 year strategies with the plants that you manage.
So we're looking from the combined cycle side at investments to upgrade for higher output. We're looking at some technologies that are out there available through OEMs. On the coal side, it's taken a lot of look at equipment that hasn't failed, trying to predict when we need to have a motor rebuilt versus a pump rebuilt for a longer term. So Marshall and Allen completely different. They live in a very different realm. Allen's not far from retiring. Marshall's got a lot longer, especially Marshall units 3 and 4 have a lot longer runway. So, we're looking at any kind of capital investment that we can do on those units to make sure that they can last reliably, up until their retirement date. Specifically, we're looking at, and most of the capital spent on the coal units are more capital replacements of components and things like that. It's not necessarily generation upgrades like you would see on a combined cycle. So, but that's some of the things we're looking into.
Okay. In this case, can you tell me about any obstacles, trouble areas that you ran into with operating your plants?
It's hard to say. We've had some issues, and they're all filed in the testimonies and paperwork that, we send to the ORS with some of the outage codes and reasons. Marshall's had a couple of failures. We had a unit 2, and again, I know we're talking DEP today, but this is DEC stuff. Most of what I have is DEC. Marshall had a wall bushing fail that, just long lead time is something that's not normally stocked, caused some failures in a switchgear, so it had an extended outage. You'll see that in the DEC data later. Asheville's ran fairly well. They have had, a couple outages, just being new, some transmitter change outs, things like that. but nothing major there. WS Lee, again, DEC, but, they had some issues with a gas turbine failure that, we had to work hard with Siemens on. And then there was an issue in December with a turning gear failure on the steam turbine. So I say they're one-off issues, at least those two major issues, but they're probably the highest long-term hitters that I've been involved with.
Okay. Are you concerned about the ability to continue to operate reliably?
I'm not. There's still good investment going into, even the coal sites. I mean, if you look at, so DEP specifically, coal made up about 11% of the generation for this review period. But we're still investing in coal. We've got some good processes in place between, plant health meetings at the stations to, our central engineering group that does review of, failures across the fleet. So not just DEP, DEC, but also Florida and the Midwest to look for investment opportunities to make sure we're spending money in the right place. Like I said, we're working on making sure we're putting money in the right spot. The combined cycle fleet, because they are, the workhorses right now, I mean, they are the base load stations. A lot of investments going there, to make sure we maintain that reliability. I think you see that with the EFOF numbers for the combined cycle fleet as well.
Could you remind me how you determine the most economic fuel source?
Yes. So the fuel price goes into it. And again, our system operations manages this, but the fuel price goes into the formula and the unit heat rate. So the, amount of, it basically gives you $1 per megawatt cost per unit. And it's a daily change. So if natural gas prices spike up, coal becomes cheaper. Those coal units run, and we've got dual fuel capability on some of the DEC units, so we're able to swap between coal and gas. So we'll do that there, but it is it's basically reliant on heat rate, which is unit efficiency, and fuel price at that time.
Could you remind me the name of the program that you use, or is it I don't think it's not a handwritten formula. Like, how is that calculation made?
There's a spreadsheet that I go on and look at, but I don't know that I could tell you all the inputs to it, because there's other things that go, like coal stations have reagent use, right? So there's some stuff that goes into that. It's a little bit more complex formula than I just gave you, but that's the basis of it. But yeah, I mean, it's, we have we call it a dynamic dispatch model where we dispatch the least cost unit at that time.
What type of quality controls do you have in place for that? I think you call it did you say economic dispatch model, or?
It's dynamic.
I'm sorry. Dynamic dispatch model. Excuse me. What type of quality control measures do you have in place?
I'd have to defer to someone in the fuels group that runs that system. I know the heat rate numbers are updated relatively frequently based on unit operating data. So, if a unit has an issue where it causes heat rate loss, right? So if you've got a vent that's leaking by, it'll affect your heat rate. So that all goes into it. Any inner workings into that more than, I guess, what I've said, I'd have to defer to somebody in SOC.
Now, Mr. Flanagan, I don't want to give you too hard of a time, but you are qualified as an expert now, so I expect a little bit more, maybe, just to help me understand how do you make sure that your dynamic dispatch model is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, and I guess, from my perspective, my role is to ensure the units are reliable when they're called on. Dynamic dispatch's role is to determine what to call on, what units to call on. So, we're there when they call us, not necessarily involved with the decision making for when they call us, right? And it's a daily change. So specifically for me, the Marshall 3 and 4 units are dual fuel capability. They can run gas or coal, gas up to about 50%. And that changes, usually every day. If coal is cheaper, we'll burn coal and take out gas. If gas is cheaper, we take out coal. They're following that market every day. So it's a pretty dynamic model. It's not, we're just there to answer the call when system operations is needing to put units on or take units off or swap fuels.
Understood. Has there ever been a time you've been called on during the review period and couldn't perform?
We have had startup failures. They are, I'd have to review the data. I mean, there are occasional startup failures where we feel like the unit's reliable, but a valve packing blows out for an old coal site. That's a pretty typical, as you open and close a valve and the unit sits offline for a couple of weeks, and then you go to set it back up and you have to stroke that valve again. The packing may have dried out. So there have been cases like that, but nothing significant that, if there are forced outages, we note that to system operations that units are unavailable, so they don't call on, as opposed to, being called on. Generally, if they're called on, we're fairly reliable with bringing the units back.
Could you walk me through what your standard procedure is during a forced outage?
Yes. I mean, it's probably not very complicated. I mean, we've got it's pretty consistent around coal and gas. First folks we involve is maintenance, right? So try to determine what failed. Usually at the gas sites, it's a little more cut and dry. There's a lot more transmitters and probes and things like that can tell you what failed. There are some anomalies at coal sites that you've got to, will involve engineering to look into logic to see what actually caused a failure. So then, once engineering helps maintenance understand what the issue was, then maintenance puts a plan together to make the repair. That's generally, you work around the clock until the repair is made and you can make the unit back available. That's pretty consistent across the board.
Thank you, Mr. Flanagan. Madam Chair, I have no further questions at this time.
Commissioners, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan.
Morning.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about the coal and the natural gas, the dual fuel, and how that really works and how you change back and forth from an operating side. I mean, do you just flip a switch? I mean, to me, coal and natural gas are very different things. And if you could help me understand just a little bit more about how you can change from one of those to the other and how that happens.
Yeah, it's I hate to say fairly simple, but it's fairly simple. So the way the systems are designed, we can run any mix. And again, most of the dual fuel units are capable of 50% gas, right? If you're just burning gas, they're capable of 50% load. But the way the burner configuration is, where you have coal input, there's also a gas burner nearby that you can literally, like for Marshall as an example, there's a ratio controller, And as you change that ratio controller, it adds more fuel in of one and backs down the fuel of the other. But, you know, you're in a boiler. It's not like you're burning in a combustion turbine, right? You're in a boiler. So, you know, there's room for those, you know, kind of impeding fires, impeding flames. But you change the ratio controller and it backs down one and picks up the other to make sure you're maintaining the same output. And it's relatively simple. Not that it comes without issues at times, but it's relatively simple.
So, is one fuel or the other cause more maintenance issues, or not really, or?
Yeah, I mean, just naturally, coal gives you more maintenance, only because of the associated equipment that comes with burning coal, right? So coal, you go through a pulverizer and you've got the ash system in the back that you've got to manage the ash. So when you think about burning gas, you don't have to worry about any of that, right? There's a regulating valve, it goes in, it burns, it makes no ash. So that's, you know, obviously some more maintenance burning coal. But, you know, if you keep things running right, it's not significant either.
So does the difference in the maintenance cost and does that figure into the dispatch decision?
So not as much, and it's something we've been talking about in a broader scale. With the volatility of fuel pricing, even a little bit of O&M maintenance cost doesn't come near outweighing the change in fuel price, right? So from a customer perspective, even though you know you may be adding or deferring a little bit of O&M maintenance, the O&M that you're saving with the fuel swap it vastly outweighs. But we're looking at possibly including some of that, but not right now.
Okay. So these dual fuel plants, were they designed that way from the beginning, or have they been modified?
Yeah, so these were upgrades, relatively recent, in the 2021 timeframe. The units are the supercritical units that have longer term retirement dates. So Blues Creek units, the Marshall 3 and 4 units, and then Cliffside 6. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan, good to see you, and hope this doesn't halt your recuperation, but appreciate your coming under the circumstances.
Thank you.
It's always challenging with a first witness to know who the right witness is to ask, so I may ask you some things that you want to pass on and suggest another witness, and I welcome that. First, I want to start with a big question in terms of North Carolina and South Carolina, because clearly you're talking about DEP system-wide. Are there elements that, are there fuel cost, how are the fuel costs allocated and are they allocated from a North Carolina, South Carolina perspective?
May have to pass this off to the fuels. Yeah, I mean, I know that, you know, from my perspective, and it kind of goes back to the questions from, you know, the unit cost page. Each unit has its own fuel cost, right? So even at a coal perspective, each coal site has a different fuel cost due to deliveries and things like that. The gas prices vary by location as well. You know, for DEP in South Carolina, as an example, the Darlington CTs usually run a little bit higher fuel cost due to where it's coming from. I don't have any details of that, but I know they run a little bit higher. So it is by unit. But again, I may have to defer that to the fuels witness.
And which witness would that be, just so I'm clear?
I may have missed a note.
Okay, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
And that's okay. And related to dynamic dispatch, is this the first time is that a new element for Duke?
No, I mean, the term dynamic dispatch is newer, but we've been, operating least cost unit for a long time. I think there's more inputs into that now, but we've been operating that way for a long time.
Okay. So none of us have crystal balls, and we certainly didn't before the Winter Storm Elliott, and you all have a timeline for preparing this. Are there lessons learned that you've experienced at your dispatch, the non-nuclear supplies that have come from the variability that we've experienced in the past in terms of weather or fuel cost? Are there lessons learned based on that you bring to the table based on your expertise?
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I think our fleet does well from an operating experience standpoint is try to pull lessons learned out. The Winter Storm Elliott, there's been a lot of conversation around winterization, winter prep. We've got some lessons learned from that we're currently working through. EOP 12 is a NERC standard that's coming out as well that's pushing some of that, but there's still some lessons learned that we're working through. Again, some of the fuels group on price variability of and availability of coal, as an example. Taking a little bit of a different look at what we stockpile on site. I think fuel oil is another example of that. Making sure that with what we saw through Winter Storm Elliott, that we've got fuel oil capacity when needed. In times like that where gas usage is high. But yeah, I think we do a good job as a fleet for, really any kind of lesson learned. If there's an event anywhere, we're looking for, making sure it's not going to repeat itself at another site.
I noticed in your testimony that there's 4 megawatts of battery storage that may not have been accessible in the past. That's new resource. How has that been working, and how does that relate to some of the flexibility that you were talking about earlier between coal and gas-fired units?
Yeah, I think it's been working well. The batteries, a little bit of, when you think about batteries, right? So the 4 megawatts is a nameplate capacity.
Okay.
You also have to look at their megawatt hour rating, which is generally their 4-hour battery, so 16 megawatt hours. So it gives you a little bit, and 4 megawatts isn't much, but it does give you a little bit of flexibility around a peak or something like that. I know the team that's working on the IRP is looking at storage solutions long term. There has been, and the company's already announced, 13 megawatts going in at the old Asheville coal facility. It's actually going to go on the footprint of the old coal units. So storage is a long-term solution that we're looking at. It's hard to see a lot of a difference with 4 megawatts of battery because of Bad Creek Hydro. So if you look at Bad Creek Hydro, it's basically a big battery itself, right? So it's pump storage hydro, so you're able to pump up when demand is down and then use that for generation when demand is up, which is, that's a lot of generation. So I know that all that's on the DEC side, but I think, from a battery technology, the company is looking at longer term storage solutions that I'm sure you'll see in the upcoming RP filing.
Was your point about Bad Creek, you said something about it's hard to see the impact, I think, of the battery as compared to Bad Creek, which has a greater impact.
Significantly more megawatts.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Do you have anything to say about hedging fuel cost?
Definitely not my
Okay.
realm.
Who would I ask that of? I'll ask.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Fuels. Thank you.
Okay. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, further questions for this witness?
Chair,
Commissioner Irvin?
thank you. Mr. Flanagan, we appreciate you showing up under the weather, and thank you for being with us virtually today.
Thank you.
You were going over the percentages of fuel sources in Duke Energy Progress's area, and I was trying to take some notes. I think you said percentage-wise it's about 40% natural gas. Is that right?
That was correct.
And how much is coal? Is it 20?
About 11%.
11%. Okay. And what else was part of the total mix?
So most of the remainder is in nuclear. I didn't call out the nuclear percentage. I believe it was about 48% nuclear.
Okay. And how much for solar?
0.4%.
Why is that number so low?
Part of that is installed capacity. There's just, even on a nameplate standpoint, solar's very similar to battery, right? So 100 megawatt solar farm will give you 100 megawatts at the peak of the day, or however those that site is angled at the sun. So whenever peak for that site is for the day, it may give you, assuming it's cloudless, whatever the nameplate is, 100 megawatts. But going into that, it ramps up slowly. It peaks out for a very short time, and then it ramps back off. So, total output compared to, what is nameplate capacity, is quite a bit lower than what you would see as a nameplate. The other thing, anytime it's cloudy, you don't get full peak. And then, there's still, the nuclear units are still running wide open at night when solar's not running, right? So it just, it dilutes down that number of what solar actually, as a total percentage of generation, it just kind of dilutes down that because of, the short time that the solar is actually capable of producing nameplate capacity.
And so, would you agree with me that it's always best for an electric utility to have a diverse portfolio of fuel choices?
Yes, that's correct. That's Duke's philosophy, yes.
And would you also agree with me that there's no fuel cost when you're using the solar energy that is available?
That's correct.
And so this may be kind of an IRP question, but is the company looking to transition to more utility-owned solar connected with battery? Because I understand the non-dispatchable nature of solar, but as battery storage increases, say from 4 hours to 8 or 10 hours, and the costs come down, wouldn't you think that matching battery with solar would be a viable option going forward?
I'll say I personally agree with that. I know that is probably more of an IRP, and I think that's what we're looking at longer term is, a solar with storage solution instead of one or the other.
Very good. When is the Allen plant scheduled for retirement?
Currently, by the end of 2024 is the published date.
And is there a company plan to utilize that site once the coal-fired facility is closed or retired?
No, at this point, there's really been no conversation of using that site. They are putting batteries in on Allen land, but it's actually towards the discharge across the road. It's not necessarily on the coal site because of the because of its location on the river, not far from the airport, there's some concerns about siting there and having too much there for future generation. Plus, you've got ash remediation that's also going on site. So right now, there's no plans for that site.
Well, have you evaluated the site for possible utility solar since you own the property and since the interconnection to the grid is already there? Couldn't you save substantial money by using that site?
Yes, and that's usually so. Asheville is a good example of that. So they start studies early. They've announced the Asheville solar and battery installation. Allen's, my guess, is going to be very similar for using some of that. If you look at the footprint of where the facility sits, it's actually a very small footprint. Most of the footprint for usable solar is similar to what Asheville is doing. Is once the ash pond is complete, once the ash remediation is complete, and that land has been returned, putting solar in that is a much larger area than just the footprint of the site. So,
thank you. What about you mentioned that you're looking right now long term in terms of equipment reliability, and you talked about some of the problems with failed startups, particularly coal plants. What's kind of the solution for that problem long term?
Yeah, I'd have to look back at data. We don't have a lot of startup failures. Generally the issues that we're seeing now are when there are forced outages. There's some supply chain concerns that, as coal plants go away, the vendors that support them some have gone out of business. So, parts that may have taken, 2 or 3 weeks to get before, or were easy to stock or easy to rebuild and put in stock, are just taking longer to get now. So we do have a plan to look at critical spares. Each station went through and had a critical spare list to look at items that are longer lead time items to make sure we can go ahead and kind of preemptively either purchase spares or have spares rebuilt to make sure they're in good working order. So we are going through some of that to ensure reliability. From a startup failure, when we have outages, we go into a lot of these valves, but you don't go into every valve, and sometimes you don't go into the one that fails. But we're trying to do a better job, and that's kind of what I was mentioning before with like fleet learnings. We've got a CDG Services, Carolina's Dispatchable Generation Services group, that helps look at events across the fleet and say, hey, this was an issue that happened at Roxborough. You may want to take a look at this valve at Marshall if you have something similar, to just make sure that it gives us an opportunity to make sure we don't have a similar failure that someone else had.
Very good. I'm glad to hear that you're thinking in that long-term way. Let's talk a minute about the outage on Christmas Eve. Some DEP customers were affected. It was primarily in the DEC area, right?
I believe that's right. I think it was more in DEC, but DEP was affected as well.
Do you recall if were there any problems with startups in the DEP area?
We had some smaller CTs that experienced startup failures. One in witness Rumpani's testimony she spoke about was the Blewett CTs had startup failures. None of the larger units experienced startup failures. There were derates due to one reason or the other, frozen transmitter lines, sensing lines. But the startup failures, at least for DEP, were for Blewett. I can't think of any in DEC, but I don't have that data with me since we were looking at DEP.
Right. No problem. My thought there in terms of are you doing some winterization on the plants that had startup issues to try to cover that base going forward if we have an extreme cold snap again?
Yes, we are. So we've had a winterization effort across all of RRE, not just the Carolinas, but Florida and the Midwest as well. Florida really doesn't have as much to worry about, but to look at winterization, and we're actually bringing in SMEs to do walk downs. So when you look at what our historical practice has been for winterization prep is verifying heat trace circuits are working. There were some heat trace circuits that branched out. So even if you verify that the circuit's working, kind of like a tree at the trunk, it doesn't mean that all the limbs are operable. So we've got some SMEs involved focusing on the outdoor units, and they're the ones that experienced the failures across Christmas Eve that are looking at heat trace installation, the insulation installation and lagging to make sure that there's 100% coverage. One of the issues at Smith Energy Complex with the D rate that they had was around the heat trace was working, and there was a small area that had not been insulated, allowed that line to freeze. So the SMEs and outside companies coming in to help us with an assessment to make repairs and make sure we've got everything completed before the next winter.
Great. It's good to hear. What is an SME? I haven't heard
Subject
that term.
matter expert. Yeah. So
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you very much. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you,
Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan. We certainly appreciate your testimony here, and I can feel your pain with regard to being under the weather. I had something last week that was akin to the flu, although they said it wasn't the flu, but it sure felt like it. So you have my sympathies this morning having to undergo this.
I'm in a similar boat, and I don't know what it is, but it won't go away.
Well, you're being a lot more stalwart about it than I was. I pretty much wimped out last week, so appreciate. And I'm guzzling water like you are, so it helps. Believe me. I noted in response to questions from Commissioner Justin Williams that part of your job is to ensure the units are reliable and ready when they're called upon. Is that a correct assessment of what you said?
Yes, that's accurate.
And that the units answer the call when system operations calls. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. In response to Commissioner Irvin, you just spoke about some of the weatherization, and that's part of my concern is, and it sounds like you've read Witness Rupani's testimony. You referenced it in your response. Is there some sort of annual checklist or review that the utility goes through before you get to the winter season, or maybe even the summer season, to make sure that the units are primed and ready for either the cold or the heat that's coming?
Yes, and that's part of what I was speaking to. So every station has winter and summer preparedness checklists that we go through. It's a PM, preventative maintenance task, that comes out every year. The focus has mainly been ensuring that all of the heat trace circuits are operable. And, that's what I was saying. The process for testing that was to test at the source, right? Test at the power source for the heat trace. So, it'd be like testing the trunk of the tree to make sure the tree's still standing, not knowing if a limb had broken off. And so, we're taking greater effort to, and some of this takes, removing insulation and verifying that circuits are working. Just a lot more in-depth look at what we've done in the past. There's been a lot of effort over time. If you look back to the polar vortex, Smith Energy is a good example. Had significant issues with winterization. I believe all but one of the combined cycle units tripped offline during the polar vortex. This time we had some derates at Dan River and Smith on the combined cycle side, but significant improvements have gone into that. But there were obviously a few things that were missed that caused derates at that time. So we're going back and taking a little bit tighter look at making sure we know every leg to make sure we're not missing anything.
Well, but the reality is that there were weatherization issues that were missed that led to either I think you indicated frozen transmitter lines and sensor lines that led to either startup issues, derates, or units shutting off. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the weather-related issues that we had during Winter Storm Elliott were all derates. The startup failures weren't necessarily cold weather related. So the Blewett startup failures weren't necessarily cold weather related. The derates that we had were due to frozen sensor lines. Dan River, Roxborough, Mayo, Smith, very similar. So there were obviously some things that were missed. And I think has led to a tighter process for ensuring that systems are operable.
And the result of the outages or the derates or the units not being available is that Duke had to purchase power elsewhere at a time when everybody else was trying to purchase power and the rates were pretty high for that purchased power. Is that correct?
That's accurate, I believe.
So by virtue of the fact that the weatherization issues did not work, it led to Duke having to purchase power at rates much more than what Duke would have been able to produce power had the units been available and working properly.
That sounds fair. I can't speak to the fuels and rates and purchase power at the time. That's not my realm, but I mean that sounds fair.
Has Duke finished the shall we call it autopsy or postmortem of Winter Storm Elliott to get to the causes, identifying all of them?
Not that I have seen, and it may just be that I'm not privy to all the inner workings. That I think it touched all of the departments. So I know there's been a team working on it, but I haven't seen the final root cause or anything like that.
And I don't mean to pick on, please don't get me wrong. I don't mean to pick on you, and I don't mean to pick on Duke Energy Progress, because I think that Duke Energy Progress is a good company. They work extremely hard from what I can tell. But this commission is charged with making sure that ratepayers don't pay more than they should. So we have to look at both sides of the coin. So please don't think that I'm being unduly harsh or critical of this, because I have to look at both sides.
I understand.
Thank you. I appreciate the answers to my questions, and I certainly hope you feel better in the very near future. So.
Thank you.
Commissioners, anything further? Ms. Brown, any redirect?
No redirect.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan, you may stand down, and thank you again for your testimony.
Chair Belzer, we'd ask that Mr. Flanagan be excused.
Ms. Brown, you do so at your peril.
Understand.
Thank you,
Chair Belzer. I believe he's planning to stick around, but
I understand.
The ask.
I just don't know what may come out later, that somebody may have an issue that needs to be addressed. So, ready with your next witness?
And I wanted to address something before I call the next panel, just so the commissioners are aware that we do have a witness, Mr. McClay, who can speak to dynamic dispatch. The question on fuel cost allocation between South Carolina and North Carolina would be to Ms. Harrington, and Mr. McClay could also speak to any hedging questions. So he will be on this panel.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. I'm sure we all appreciate those heads up, so thank you very much.
Chair Belzer, the company would next call Mr. Tom Simrell, Mr. Jim McClay, and Mr. Kevin Houston as a panel.
ask the court reporter to swear the witnesses in, please.
Gentlemen, if you would raise your right hands, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Gentlemen, you're going to need to make sure those microphones on, and I'm going to ask that you pull them as close to you as possible. I hate to ask you to lean forward, but you almost have to eat the microphone. So.
Okay.
So, Mr. Simrel, would you state your name for the record, please? And I guess I could say, Mr. McClay and Mr. Houston, you probably don't need to have your mics on yet, since Mr. Simrel will go first.
Yes. Tom Simrel.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations for Duke Energy Corporation.
How long have you worked in the nuclear industry?
I've worked over 38 years.
What's your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Clemson University, and I previously held a Senior Reactor Operator license at Catawba Nuclear Station.
Can you please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to this proceeding?
Yes, I began my nuclear career as an engineer at Catawba Nuclear Station. I then served in a variety of leadership positions at Catawba in operations and engineering before becoming the operations superintendent of McGuire Nuclear Station. I transferred back to Catawba to serve as the operations manager, then the plant manager, then the site vice president before assuming my current role in January of this year.
Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
I'm responsible for providing oversight for the safe and reliable operation of Duke Energy's nuclear stations in North Carolina. I'm also involved in the operations of Duke Energy's other nuclear stations, including DEP's Robinson Nuclear Plant located in Darlington County, South Carolina.
Chair Belzer, based on Mr. Simrel's extensive experience, I move to qualify this witness as an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations.
Any objections or questions regarding to qualifications of the witness as an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations? Hearing none, Mr. Simrel will be qualified as an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Simrel, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 12 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would ask that Mr. Simrel's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
We have a confidential exhibit, do we not?
I'm planning to go through that after his testimony.
I'm sorry. I'm looking ahead.
But
Mr.
yes,
Simrel's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given from the stand.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Simrel, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 publicly filed exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
I do not.
Chair Belzer, I would ask that Mr. Simrel's 2 publicly filed exhibits be entered as an, I guess that's the first composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Simrel's public exhibits shown, Mr. Simrel's public exhibit, Simrel Exhibit 1 and Simrel Exhibit 2 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 1 and admitted into the evidence of this case.
Mr. Simrel, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 1 confidentially filed exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to that exhibit at this time?
I do not.
Chair Belzer, I would ask that Mr. Simrel's confidentially filed exhibit be entered as the next hearing exhibit and that it remain under seal. The confidential treatment was granted by order number 2023-336.
Mr. Simrel's Exhibit 3 will be marked for identification as Hearing Exhibit 2 and received into the evidence of this case, and it will remain under seal.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Simrel, would you please provide a summary of your direct testimony at this time?
Yes, ma'am. The purpose of my testimony is to describe and discuss the performance of Brunswick, Harris, and Robinson nuclear plants for the period of March 1st, 2022 through February 28th, 2023. DEP's primary objective is to safely provide reliable and cost-effective electricity to its customers. Safe and efficient operation of our nuclear facilities supports fulfillment of this objective. DEP operated its nuclear plants in a reasonable and prudent manner during the review period and achieved an actual system average capacity factor of 90.98%, while providing approximately 48.5% of the total power generated by DEP. There were 4 refueling outages completed during the review period. Brunswick Unit 1 Spring 2022 refueling outage began on March 4th, 2022. The unit returned to service on April 4th, 2022, a duration of 30.7 days compared to a scheduled allocation of 33 days. Harris's fall 2022 refueling outage began on October 8th of 2022. Harris returned to service on October 30th, 2022, a duration of 22.2 days compared to a scheduled allocation of 25 days. Shortly after Harris exited the refueling outage and the unit reached 16% power, a wiring fault caused a loss of power to the unit's reactor coolant pumps and shutdown of the reactor. The unit was removed for service for 3.4 days to correct the issue. Robinson's fall 2022 refueling outage began on November 19th, 2022. The 41.6-day outage was extended 11.6 days beyond the 30-day scheduled allocation to address core barrel indications discovered during the reactor vessel internals inspection. Shortly after Robinson exited the refueling outage, the generator was disconnected from the grid for 1.9 days to address a configuration issue with a protection relay. The unit returned to service on January 1st, 2023. Brunswick Unit 2 Spring 2023 refueling outage began on February 7th, 2023 and was completed on March 8th of 2023. The outage duration was 28.3 days compared to a scheduled allocation of 29 days. Other outages also occurred during the review period. Harris was offline for 1.4 days in April of 2022 to address a suction isolation valve for a condenser vacuum pump that failed to shut, and for 1.5 days in August of 2022 to replace the Bravo condensate pump motor. In late September of 2022, Robinson was removed from service for 16.3 days to replace the Bravo and Charlie reactor coolant pump seals. In general, refueling and maintenance requirements impact the availability of our nuclear plants. DEP's scheduling philosophy is to plan for the best possible duration for each outage activity within the outage plan. Although one of the refueling outages extended beyond the originally scheduled allocation overall, the company achieved a net nuclear capacity factor of 101.71%, excluding reasonable outage time. The performance of the fleet supports DEP's continued commitment to achieving high performance without compromising safety and reliability. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Simrell. Mr. McClay, would you please state your name for the record?
Jim McClay.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am the Managing Director of Natural Gas Trading for Duke Energy Corporation.
How long have you worked in the energy industry?
I've worked in the industry for 26 years.
Please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
Since joining Progress Energy as an energy trader in 1998, I've worked in various power trading and natural gas procurement functions and leadership roles, including Director of Power Trading, Portfolio Management, and Manager of Gas and Oil Trading. Following the merger between Duke Energy and Progress Energy, I was named Manager of Gas and Oil Trading for Duke Energy. In May 2019, I was promoted to Director of Trading, and in August of 2021, I assumed my current position as Managing Director of Natural Gas Trading.
Mr. McClay, can you describe your current responsibilities at the company?
As Managing Director of Natural Gas Trading, I participate in all aspects of the overall strategic direction and commercial management of the purchase, delivery, and storage of natural gas for Duke Energy. This includes monitoring and providing guidance in various areas of fuel markets, including feedback regarding supply and demand price, availability, economics, deliverability, and existing and future supply sources. I also supervise the company's physical natural gas procurement and associated transportation activity, including negotiation and administration of long-term and short-term purchase contracts, as well as the company's associated financial hedging programs. In addition to natural gas, I supervise procurement for fuel oil, optimization of emission allowances, and the power trading and hedging functions for Duke Energy's Midwest utilities.
Chair Belzer, given Mr. McClay's extensive experience in fuel trading, procurement, and hedging programs, I move to qualify Mr. McClay as an expert in the fields of gas and oil trading and fuel hedging.
Any objections or questions related to Mr. McClay's expertise in gas and oil trading and fuel hedging? Hearing none, Mr. McClay will be qualified as an expert in gas, oil trading, and fuel hedging.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. McClay, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 15 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the Commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Chair Belzer, I would ask that Mr. McClay's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. McClay's pre-filed direct testimony will be received into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you. Mr. McClay, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No.
I would ask that Mr. McClay's 2 pre-filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. McClay's exhibits shown as McClay Exhibit 1 and McClay Exhibit 2 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 3 and received into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. McClay, would you please provide a summary of your direct testimony at this time?
Yes. The purpose of my testimony is to describe DEP's fossil fuel purchasing practices, provide actual fossil fuel costs for the period March 1st, 2022 to February 28th, 2023, and describe projected changes forthcoming for the period August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2024. DEP's average delivered cost of coal per ton for the review period was $92.63 per ton compared to $82.65 per ton in the prior review period, representing an increase of approximately 12%. This includes an average transportation cost of $32.83 per ton in the review period compared to $33.60 per ton in the prior review period, representing a decrease of approximately 2%. The company's average cost of gas purchased for the review period was $8.04 per MMBTU, as compared to $5.34 per MMBTU in the prior review period, representing an increase of 51%. The cost of gas includes gas supply, transportation, storage, and financial hedging.
Mr. McClay, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you slow down just a little bit?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bill. Thank you.
No problem. DEP's coal burn for the review period was 2.3 million tons, compared to a coal burn of 2.9 million tons in the prior review period, representing a decrease of 20%. The company consumed approximately 184.8 million MMBTU of natural gas in the review period compared to 170.3 million MMBTU in the prior review period, representing an increase of 8%. Changes in coal and natural gas burns were primarily driven by the relationship of coal commodity prices during 2022 relative to natural gas prices in the same period, as record high coal commodity prices offset higher natural gas costs, reducing gas to coal generation switching. Coal markets continue to experience high volatility for a variety of reasons, and the coal supply chain experienced increasing challenges throughout 21 and 2022 as historically low utility stockpiles combined with rapidly increasing demand for coal, both domestically and internationally, made procuring additional coal supply increasingly challenging. Coal producers were largely unable to respond to the rapid rise in demand due to capacity constraints from labor and resource shortages, which drove domestic and export coal prices to record levels and limited coal supply availability. The utility sector's declining demand for coal has also driven rail transportation providers to modify their business models to be less dependent on coal-related transportation, and the company experienced increased delivery delays created by rail transportation shortages in 2022. With the threat of potential rail strike averted in early December 2022, DEP has seen delivery improvements by its rail transportation service providers. Natural gas prices were influenced by growth in export demand, as well as stable production, lower than average storage, inventory balances, and strong domestic demand. A host of factors kept upward pressure on gas prices into late 2022, but since early 2023, moderate weather, increasing inventory storage balances, and growing production caused natural gas prices to sharply decline. As I explained in my testimony, the company has created an updated model-driven approach called dynamic dispatch to reflect coal market supply chain dynamics in the forecasted fuel prices. Dynamic dispatch will generate an optimized fuel price for the unit commitment and dispatch that minimizes system costs over the near-term fuel planning horizon, while integrating the forward-looking forecasted coal delivery plan and inventory balances into the current coal fuel price process for updating weekly prices for unit commitment and dispatch. DEP's projections for the billing period include approximately 2.5 million tons of coal and 183.1 million MMBtu of natural gas consumed. These projections are subject to change due to multiple factors, including but not limited to exposure to market prices, the amount of Central App coal DEP is able to purchase and deliver, and the non-Central Appalachian coal DEP is able to consume, changes in transportation rates, performance contract deliveries by suppliers and railroads that may be missed, and potential additional costs associated with suppliers' compliance with legal and statutory changes, changes in actual delivered fuel costs, and weather-driven demand. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. McClay. Mr. Houston, would you please state your name for the record?
Kevin Houston.
Thank you. By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm the Director for Fuel Management and Design for Nuclear Engineering for Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas.
How long have you worked in the nuclear industry?
Approximately 30 years.
What is your educational background?
I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Nuclear Engineering from University of Florida, a Master's degree in Nuclear Engineering from North Carolina State University, and I have a professional engineering license in the state of North Carolina.
Are you involved in any organizations that are relevant to your testimony?
I served as a chairman of the Nuclear Energy Institute's Utility Fuel Committee in the years 2017 through 2020.
Please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
I've held a variety of roles within the company, including as an engineer in the Nuclear Core Design Group and also in the Fuel Fabrication and Enrichment Procurement Group. I've also held managerial roles related to purchasing of uranium, conversion services, enrichment services, fuel fabrication services, spent fuel management, and dry fuel storage. I assumed my current role in March of 2022.
Can you describe your current responsibilities at the company, please?
I'm responsible for nuclear fuel procurement, spent fuel management, and dry storage, reactor core design of the nuclear units owned and operated by Duke Energy Carolinas and Duke Energy Progress.
Chair Belzer, based on Mr. Houston's extensive experience in matters related to nuclear fuel and nuclear fuel procurement, I move to qualify Mr. Houston as an expert in the field of nuclear fuel procurement.
Objections or questions regarding the witness's expertise? Hearing none, we'll accept Mr. Houston and qualify him as an expert in nuclear fuel procurement.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Mr. Houston, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 8 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
If asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony today, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
I would ask that Mr. Houston's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Houston's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Houston, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
I would ask that Mr. Houston's 2 pre-filed exhibits be entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Houston's pre-filed exhibits styled Houston Exhibit 1 and Houston Exhibit 2 will be a composite exhibit marked for identification as hearing exhibit number 4 and admitted into the evidence of this case.
Thank you. Mr. Houston, would you please provide a summary of your testimony, of your direct testimony at this time?
Sure. The purpose of my testimony is to provide information regarding DEP's nuclear fuel purchasing practices, provide the cost for the March 1st, 2022 through February 28th, 2023 review period, and describe changes forthcoming for the August 1st, 2023 through July 31st, 2024 billing period. DEP's nuclear fuel procurement practices involve computing near and long-term consumption forecasts, establishing nuclear system inventory levels, projecting required annual fuel purchases, requesting proposals from qualified suppliers, negotiating a portfolio of long-term contracts from diverse sources of supply, and monitoring deliveries against contract commitments. Consistent with industry practices, long-term contracts are used extensively to cover forward requirements and reduce exposure to possible price volatility and supply disruptions from any single source of supply. Duke Energy Progress's portfolio of diversified contract pricing yielded an average unit cost of $41.67 per pound for uranium concentrates during the review period, representing a decrease of around 1% per pound from the prior review period. The average unit cost of DEP's purchases of enrichment services during the review period decreased 47% from $76 to $76.73 per separative work unit. The delivered costs for fabrication and conversion services have a limited impact on the overall expense rate, given the dollar amount for these purchases represent a substantially smaller percentage of Duke Energy Progress's total direct fuel costs relative to uranium concentrates or enrichment. The company expects nuclear fuel costs on a cents per kilowatt hour basis through the next billing period to remain relatively flat. Although costs of certain components of nuclear fuel are expected to increase in future years, nuclear fuel costs on a cents per kilowatt basis will likely continue to be a fraction of the cost of fossil fuel. Because fuel is typically expensed over 2 or 3 operating cycles, roughly 3 to 6 years, Duke Energy Progress's nuclear fuel expense in the upcoming billing period will be determined by the cost of the fuel assemblies loaded into the reactors during the review period as well as prior periods. The company anticipates the average fuel expense will remain relatively flat from 0.6088 cents per kilowatt hour incurred in the review period to approximately 0.609 cents per kilowatt hour in the billing period. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Houston. Chair Belzer, members of the commission, Mr. Simrell, Mr. McClay, and Mr. Houston are now available to answer any questions from council or the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We've been going about an hour and a half. Before we begin with cross questions, let's take a 15-minute break. Gentlemen, you're under oath. I remind you not to discuss your testimony with anyone or allow anyone to attempt to discuss your testimony with you. Let's break until 11:45. Thank you. Good morning and welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We are here today in a hearing involving docket number 2023-1-E. Let's take a roll call of commissioners. With us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin and Commissioner Caston. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Justin Williams, Vice Chair Powers, Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Carolee Williams, and Chair Belser. Did I get everybody? And we have finished with direct exam of a panel of witnesses for Duke, and we'll start with cross-examination. Nucor Steel, South Carolina. Any cross? No cross. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League and Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions. Thank you, Chair Belser.
Thank you. Office of Regulatory Staff.
No questions.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions for any of these witnesses? Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Trying to get my microphone turned on. Let's see. Mr. Clay, you're talking about in your testimony the need for interstate gas transmission lines. And so I just kind of wanted to hear what you think about what's going on with the Mountain Valley Pipeline, how that's may or may not impact us in South Carolina.
Right. So MVP got a very favorable treatment with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. There was a carve out so that they had basically mandated all of their permits for them so they could complete their construction. As of the 23rd, which is on Friday, they received all of their permits to move forward. And on Monday, yesterday, Equitrans filed with the FERC for a notice to proceed with a deadline of tomorrow. So that's good for a new pipeline, some new infrastructure. So as far as MVP impacting South Carolina, there is obviously MVP ends at Transco Zone 5, which is where we receive our gas, and where South Carolina also it fuels our power plants. There is a restriction up on Transco north that some of that gas that actually impacts Transco when it goes in service. Some of it will be able to make its way down via displacement from other long-haul transportation holders. So they'll be able to take the gas north of that restriction and deliver gas to Zone 5 where we burn it. So that's very positive for South Carolina. Also, if we look further ahead, Transco has recently put out an open season for an expansion from north to south through the 160 restriction point where the gas is kind of restricted from coming down. So that project, if it moves forward, would also release a lot of that gas into the south, into our service territory. That would be very, very positive. Timeline on that is probably 4 or 5 years, but in the immediate effects would be felt to a small amount. Yes.
Okay, so the Mountain Valley Pipeline, as you said, would be delivering gas to Zone 5, but in Virginia, I believe, and displacement. So I'll make sure I understand what that means. That means...
No, that's okay. Yeah, so that just means that if somebody has a long path, they can what's called segment the path. In other words, receive the gas up there in Virginia, and they might have a path from Alabama. So they'll take their gas in Virginia and go north with it, and that'll make available the path that's unused to come up to Zone 5 from Alabama. So that will happen, and the market will figure out ways to displace and get gas to our service territory. It won't be the full amount, but it will be it'll be phased in.
So basically, I think that means that we'll be able to take some gas off of the line here, and it'll kind of be refilled where the MVP connects with Transco. Is that
Right.
physically kind of what's going on?
Yes. Yes.
All right. And you mentioned Transco starting to work on a north to south. So does that mean that gas would actually flow from north to south?
Yes, it's a project that basically starts at the terminus of MVP and has 3 different paths what they're offering to the market, and you know they're looking for participants.
Okay. So in connection with the natural gas hedging program, you mentioned in your testimony that you use physical call option agreements, and you also mentioned the rolling 60-month structured financial natural gas hedging program. Can you help me get a little bit more familiar with both of those concepts?
Sure. So as far as hedging, we use financial instruments. It's a structured program where we're layering in financial hedges that NYMEX Henry Hub, which is basically something similar to what we buy. It's a common liquid product. We have plenty of liquidity, and we layer it in over a rolling 60-month period, so that's 5 years. So as we go through 1 month, like we'll be going through July soon, so July will roll off, and then the back month, the 60-month, will roll on, so that we're always adding to our hedges. And if you look out, it's over, we divide it into sort of 12-month periods where we have targeted hedge percentages, some ranges, so that we have a lower hedge percentage out in that last 12 months. And then as you graduate up to the near term, we're up to our targets that we hedge to. So the good news is it has a layering effect. You're reaching out to a less volatile part of the curve, and using liquid products, and it's worked to our benefit. The last year, for example, for the South Carolina retail customers, we have $38 million in positive revenues, which is good. Although these types of programs, they're very pragmatic, they're repeatable, and that there's some years you may lose a little, some years it's going to help you manage that volatility and give you some price certainty. So it benefits the customers from that perspective, and we look at it every year. It gets reviewed by we review it as well as our internal risk folks, and if we need to make improvements to it, we do that as well along the way.
Okay. So how long has the company been doing this particular program, the hedging program that you described?
Since 2006.
Okay. And long term, it does have costs. And as you said, in the last year or so, it's been very beneficial, $38 million or so. How about in the long term? Is there anything you can say about that that's not confidential?
Yeah, in the long term, it has lost, a little less than what it made this year. Very close. So, like I said, it's one of those things. It's insurance, right? That you try to protect those price spikes, and it's worked. And we've, like I said, we review it every year, and we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We found that it's very effective.
Okay. But basically, over the long term, generally speaking, both the benefits and the costs, whichever way it is, they're paid by customers, correct?
Yes. The benefit too is, when you do incur, when you are you're have a positive result. The piece that's unhedged, obviously you're paying more for. And when prices go down, and if you do have a loss, then the customers are benefiting on the piece that's unhedged, right? So you're kind of in the middle there, and it's kind of an average between the two. And we think that's the right way to go.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That's all I have for right now.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Justin Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today. Question is for the panel, so whoever feels most capable to answer the question, please just take it. Regarding nuclear fuel, before we get to the fuel, let's go to the outages. I think this will be specifically for Mr. Simrel. Do you feel as if you had more outages during this review period than in years past?
From a refueling outage standpoint, it's pretty standard because it's based on, whether the plant operates on an 18-month frequency or a 24-month frequency. So we had 4 refueling outages in the time period, which is nominal. And then, as noted in the documentation, we did have several forced outages due to maintenance challenges. I would say probably nominal of what we've seen historically. I mean, ideally, we work to minimize those, and when we do have a refueling outage or have a forced outage, we work very promptly around the clock to resolve the issue and get the unit back online to produce power.
Okay, thank you for that. Could you remind me the age of the nuclear facility?
For anyone in particular?
Just all of them, just
all of them. So for Robinson went online in 1971. Brunswick started making power, Brunswick Unit 2 in 1975. Brunswick Unit 1 started making power in 1977. And Harris Nuclear Plant started generating electricity in 1987.
Okay. And how much longer do you plan, or have you forecasted the units to stay online?
So right now, Duke Energy, we've announced that we're going to pursue subsequent license renewal for all 6 of our nuclear plants. We've already submitted the documentation for Oconee Nuclear Station. In 2025, we will submit the subsequent license renewal paperwork for Robinson Nuclear Plant. And Robinson currently is licensed to operate until 2030. And so we'll be pursuing an additional 20 years. And so we expect to be able to operate all of our current nuclear plants to the mid-century. It's really for Duke Energy, it's our foundation for our clean energy strategy. And so to answer your question, we'll be able to operate our plants from out to, with approval of subsequent license renewal, as long as we continue to operate safely, reliably, and cost efficient, we'll have the opportunity to operate all of our plants from 2050 to approximately 2066 would be the timeline.
Understood. And I am not a nuclear engineer by no means. Don't pretend to be. I'm just a regular guy. But with that regular guy mentality, it seems like the older a piece of equipment gets, the increased likelihood that maintenance costs and maintenance issues will also increase. Is that not the same with your nuclear facilities?
I would say, I understand your perspective, Commissioner Williams. I would say that if you look back at our history, we maintain our plants very well. We spend a lot of money both in maintenance activities and looking for upgrades and modernization. And, I would say right now our plans, our strategic plans, very confident in our facilities to be able to operate for those additional 20 years that we're talking about out to the mid-century. And I've just, back to your original question, we spend a lot of time and effort keeping the plants operating. We expect, we owe it to our operators, and ultimately it's about protecting the health and safety of the public and then providing electricity to our customers and our communities. It's something we take a lot of pride in maintaining our facilities to provide the opportunity we have to provide the product that we do.
Sounds like you feel fully confident that you'll be able to maintain the facilities regardless of their age.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there any exploration in the small modular nuclear reactors?
Is there any exploration? Is that-
By Duke?
There is. We have formed a new nuclear group. We are taking a look at small modular reactors. In addition, we're looking at some of the advanced nuclear technologies. So I do see that is I believe it's in our future. It's certainly years down the road, but ultimately you think about our current nuclear fleet being able to operate till the mid-century. I mean, clearly there's got to be, something's got to replace all that baseload generation. So that is something that we are very interested in and taking an active interest in with the small modular reactors and advanced nuclear technologies.
All right, understood. Mr. Houston, we'll talk about the fuel availability. You gave a great presentation on the pricing over the review period compared to the last review period. Is there any concern about availability?
We don't have a significant concern with availability, especially in the nearer term. In the past, I've testified just based on the way that the geopolitical situation in the country, the Ukraine invasion with Russia. Russia does supply a good portion of the world global nuclear supply there. So that's one thing that we are keeping an eye on, just making sure that regardless what happens in that scenario, that we've got adequate supply. So to that end, we're definitely interested in talking with our folks, our Washington lobbyists and our suppliers, and we're definitely interested in watching what new capacity comes online in that regard. But those are things that the market will take care of itself from that perspective. In terms of the ability to add on to new facilities that already exist or to build new ones.
So, gentlemen, both of you seem fairly confident, and I'm not seeking to undermine your confidence or your presentation, but I'm looking for risk, foreseeable risk, long-term risk, understanding geo-world politics, potential conflicts over the horizon. What's concerning to me is the amount of baseload or the generational mix is heavily reliant upon nuclear, which is good as long as the fuel is available, the infrastructure and the facilities are working well. What's the contingency plan? If Russia no longer provides the amount of fuel that they normally do, then what? What happens next?
Well, from a fuel perspective, the Western world, and primarily that's the U.S., North America, and Western Europe, has facilities capable and locations that facilities, the footprint of those facilities are expandable to be able to meet that need. So from that perspective, that's what I was getting at when I mentioned the market will dictate, there may be some incentives and some things that can incentivize them to take that risk forward. But that's not a significant concern in the longer term. We may have tight points in terms of supply where we're keeping an eye on what we think is the earliest new capacity could be built and where our coverage and where the global supply shakes out from that perspective. But in the longer, bigger picture term, they're really not big, significant concerns.
Okay, thank you, sir. So, gentlemen, it's safe to say that our baseload generation from nuclear is secure in the short term and the long term.
I would say yes, based on Mr. Houston. His group provides our fleet the nuclear fuel that we need, and confident in what he's communicated and in the ability of his team to provide the fuel that we need to operate for many years to come.
Okay, and so Mr. Houston has confirmed the availability, and you're confirming the operation of the facilities up until 2026. I think 2066. I believe you said.
Yeah, we're pursuing the opportunity. Soon we get approval for subsequent license renewal. That would allow us to operate each of our facilities additional 20 years based on what the current license is. And I'll just say back to your previous question. We have a maintenance team at each site that performs preventative maintenance activities, both when the units are operating, and then some have to be performed when the units are shut down for refueling outages. And obviously we fix things that break periodically as well, but we do preventive maintenance and surveillance testing on our plants, every day to help maintain our plants. So just going back to your previous question.
And I also heard you testify, Mr. Houston, that I think, and I may be butchering this, but what I took from your testimony, at least one point, is that cost for nuclear fuel this review period was less than the previous review period.
It was relatively flat from between this period and the last review period and what we're projecting going forward.
Okay. Any concern about any increase anywhere?
No, not in the near term.
And Mr. Simrel, I think I heard from your testimony that the maintenance you performed was nominal this review period, and nothing that's trending any more or less than the prior review period.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Clay, I want to talk to you about the market. So from a layman's perspective, I think a ratepayer, just more like the average ratepayer, hypothetically, on their list of priorities is the least expensive energy bill per month as they're managing that budget. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Okay. So when, the experts like you all get involved, and many others that are in the room, we start talking about clean energy policy, we start talking about emissions, we start talking about availability of fuel sources, things that go into market considerations and create a dynamic market. My question to you is, how is the market driving prices right now for natural gas, for coal? If you have any commentary on nuclear or solar, what do you see happening in the market in terms of driving prices?
So the market's reflective of supply demand, on short term and long term. There's I see in the coal market, there's obviously, over the years, there's a trend that there's more retirements in coal plants, and there's less being produced, and they're also, from an emission standpoint, they're getting a lot of pressure, right, to produce less. They can't get the financing a lot of times. They have to self-finance if they can. They've experienced a lot of inflation in equipment and labor over the past year and a half. They've tried to hire additional personnel, and it's taken them probably six to 8 months to hire and train. And it's hard to hold people and retain them as well. There's not a lot of people out there that want to work in coal mines. So if you put that together, plus the demand, obviously the consistent demand from the U.S., but then you have a lot of demand from overseas. Last year with the Ukraine Russia incident, you have it basically the overseas market went crazy. So all of a sudden, a lot of coal. There was a lot higher prices overseas in Asia and Europe, and the market was trying to figure out where to get coal from. So that's another pull on the market from last year in high prices. So what we've seen is the suppliers have, as well as railroads, goes the same for railroads, they don't have the ability to really ramp up demand or down demand very quickly. So the best thing for the coal market and for everybody using coal is actually to keep ratable supply moving. In other words, the power plants figure out ways. Obviously you'll want some contract flexibility. You want to stagger your procurement terms so that everything doesn't expire at the same time. You want to work with your coal suppliers and the railroads so that you can get a reliable, cost-effective product from them. So that's what I see in coal, and going forward, I don't see that changing too much. I will say that we're on the other side of the coin this year, of course. Last year, another factor was also a railroad strike, which I mentioned in my testimony. So if we fast forward to not enough coal last year to all of a sudden we go through the winter and stockpiles were built. A lot of that coal that was built up wasn't burned. So now you're on the other side of that, ramping down.
If I could ask you to slow down just a little bit, could you
Sure.
unpack that for me? The
Sure.
coal was stockpiled, but it wasn't burned. Why not?
Right. So the demand wasn't there over the winter period. So if you think about the inventories at all the plants, if you have a consistent amount of supply coming in from your contracts from railroads, all of a sudden, you weren't burning what you forecasted.
Is that because when you say demand wasn't there, is that weather related?
Well, part of it was weather, and part of it also was related to economics, because coal prices, actually, if you want to replace coal, if you could even find it last year, was you had to look at overseas prices because you were competing for the marginal coal increment. For example, last year coal prices went to, if you looked at the overseas prices, they were $400 a ton on the high end, sometimes $300, $200 if you could find them. Where right now they're let's just call it $70 a ton. So last year there was a gigantic demand for coal, which drove prices up, which caused more gas to be burned. And if you think about the gas market coming out of last winter, it was a cold winter, so there were low inventories. The Energy Information Association tracks inventories for the U.S., and the inventories came out very depleted. They were about 30% last year than they are this year, 30% lower. So as you had coming out of that, you had the coal situation, then you have the gas situation where you had steady production, you didn't have increased production. The market watches how fast it's looking at the inventory build over time before you get to the winter to make sure there's ample inventories available for withdrawal to go through the winter season. So as we went through the summer, we had a warmer than normal summer. We had a very low inventory build for a while because the producers, you didn't get a strong reaction for producers, and it takes a while for production to come online. So basically you had every week, every day, first of all, you had a lot of volatility in gas prices. They were moving 50 cents a day, up and down, 60 cents. And then on top of that, you sort of had an escalator effect to prices. So you had this slow ramp up of prices that went to probably mid-November. Last year at this time, for example, gas prices were around $9 an MMBTU. Right now they're $2.50. So there was a very big pull on the gas market. So as we exited the summer period, at the very end of that period, production started to come online. Inventories started getting built up. And then we did go through a little bit of a rough patch there in December for a few days. But other than that, it was essentially a lot warmer than normal. So the gas market was all of a sudden, we went from 95 BCF a day to about 101 BCF a day of production from producers that's tracked. So we had ample inventory, we had increased production, and we didn't have the demand. So all of a sudden we had the escalator up, and then we had the elevator down in January, where prices crashed, close to $5 or $6 MMBTU. So right now, where we are with coal and gas is we're in a very healthy, oversupplied situation. Production has remained at that level, at a higher level for gas. And I will say inventories are 30% higher than they were last year. So the market is oversupplied and comfortable. And on top of that, we have not had we didn't have a cold winter, and our summer so far is very mild. So we're enjoying lower prices for the time being. As we look forward into next year, if you look at the forward curve of gas prices, for next year, we're around $3.50 as an average. And if you look at 24, we're around $4 as an average for delivered gas prices. So that's sort of the condition where we are.
I appreciate that. And I would imagine to my hypothetical layperson, hypothetical residential ratepayer, all that sounds like a nightmare, quite frankly. High volatility and the like. You did a great
Right.
job explaining it. There's no need to rehash it. How does solar fit into all of this? The use of solar generated electricity to navigate through this difficult framework.
Right. As you know, we do have solar on the system. Solar, has a placeholder, right? It has its place in dispatch stack. We do have a solar forecast that we use that goes into the economic dispatch model every day, so that does help mitigate, over the day when it's online and it's useful. So it helps from that respect. Along with the diversified portfolio that we have. Obviously, we have pump storage, we have, CTs, gas-fired plants, we have nuclear, coal. So all of those go into mitigating that, volatility, that diversification. And, the economic dispatch model does economically dispatch every hour, and we run it several times a day. And that produces the forecast for the next 7 days. And we use that, obviously, the fuels group, the gas group, everybody gets, a forecast. And that's what we use to do our planning for the next day. And then the energy control centers are the ones that actually dispatch the units in real time. And they'll have to, obviously, if solar does not perform, or if for some reason there's too much of it on the system, we have some options there as well.
It's sounding as if you all made every reasonable effort to minimize fuel costs during the review period. Based on what I'm hearing so far, I want to probe you a little bit further to understand how hedging was beneficial to your hedging program. How it was beneficial to the ratepayer during the review period.
Right. So when we layer in fixed priced hedges, we're taking a portion, and this is over time, right? So you're hedging a portion of your forecasted burns, and you're fixing them at, when you do it over time and prices rose, we actually have a very low cost structure, so that, so when they settle and we get the profit from it, that is applied towards the bill, right? The overall fuel bill. So, if we had an average price, I know last year we had somewhere around $2.50, $3 for several months for a portion of the fuel burn. That meant that even though we were buying, in some cases, $8 gas, it was offset by the difference between the $2.50 hedge and the $8 that we would buy. So there was quite a bit of savings there.
So I think the question that I know Commissioner Thomas asked this, and I'm sure my colleagues ponder this, understanding everything you said, but just to put it simply, is hedging over time a gain or a loss to the residential ratepayer?
It's hard to say, depending on what period of time. But
well, let's work through it.
It's insurance, so
5 years.
You're paying for it. Depending on how much volatility is in the market, at whatever point in time, you could get paid back and go positive. And then if you have a lot of volatility and a low cost structure, or if you're hedging and it happens to be a higher prices in the future and they roll in to the present, and all of a sudden prices drop, then overall you'll be paying. So it's just ensuring price spikes basically is what you're doing, and you're ensuring the over the longer term a lower probability of paying for price spikes. So, you know,
in your opinion, is it better to have it
yes,
than not have it?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Especially, and I won't go into it too much, but
no. You
the
go into it.
The structure. Yeah, sure. I mean, we don't price pick. That I should probably say that, and we don't trade, right? So we don't buy and sell and buy and sell. We don't do that. We layer in over time. It's been a proven method. We used to do 3 years, and we realized, this will probably answer some of your question, that looking out 3 years, the price out 5 years was the same. And, you know, we're at a point where there was so much production 3 years ago, obviously during COVID and all that stuff, we realized that there's a lot of production online. You know, it is a good price. It's a good risk reward. You're not layering hedges at $6, you're layering them in at $2. And that over time, we expected, you know, LNG to come online, right? So exporting gas, and we expected more gas plants to come online. And in the end, we were building more gas, so it made sense to hedge out a little further. So all those things kind of came together to give us a good, you know, sense of, hey, we've reviewed our program. It's going out 3 years. We should go out 5 because you're paying the same price. And actually, prices for a while out 10 years were $2.50. So, you know, if you go much lower, you're going to have, you know, you're going to go out of business, right? So at the time, there was a plethora of gas out there. You didn't have, the producers were not very disciplined, so they were producing as much gas as they could, and it reflected itself in the market. And at that point in time, it was the right move to do, and that's what we did. We thought it was good for the customer.
Okay, thank you for that. Going back to the market volatility, the fossil fuel prices, what's going on internationally, how much influence does your company have on that?
Yeah, we don't have too much influence on that. That you're sort of, you know, it's a big market. It's a very large market. It's one of the largest markets in the world, natural gas, especially we're the largest exporter of gas.
When you say who's
we, meaning the U.S.
Oh, okay.
Largest exporter.
I'm more so specifically
Duke Energy.
Yeah.
You know, we're pretty big. You know, we're a very large consumer in the Carolinas as well as a company. I think we're the second largest vertical utility gas consumer in the country. And we are, you know, we do consume a lot of gas, but we don't move the needle.
Okay.
So, you know.
So hypothetically, if the company decided to buy as much coal as possible because they got a good price on it, how would that change, or would it change the market difficulties that you expressed earlier?
I think, yeah, from coal perspective is a lot different than the liquid gas market. And the other thing I should probably mention about coal is, you know, there is a cap on the gas market. If, you know, in terms of exports, even though exports went to $70 an MMBTU, we can only export so much. So the rest of the gas has to stay in the U.S. So that's a good thing. With coal, you know, it's pretty much unlimited, right? You can take coal. There's no limitations of exporting because the facilities for gas are limited or capped right now. For coal, they can put it on ships and take it over there. So, so that's it. It's a lot different now too. If you decide to buy a lot of coal, I would assume first of all you'd have to store it if you had nowhere to put it, and you know that's, you know, we buy based on our procurement guidelines. So the way we determine how much to buy is, you know, we use what's called a probabilistic forecast, where we're going to look at it's a stochastic forecast where we're looking out several years, and what we do is it gives a range of burns for coal based on 100 scenarios, which is and the scenarios include all the different aspects of you know of dispatch, right? So it'll be weather, it'll be coal prices, gas prices, everything on the system. So when we get that range, we know the mean and we know the probabilities of burning more and burning less, so we have a better idea of how to structure our contracts and how to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the customer. So that helps us manage, keep us in line, as well as the dynamic dispatch, which I don't think was conveyed the way it is. All the dynamic dispatch is a way to price coal into the economic dispatch model. So it's just about coal. All it is it's a modeled way of coming up with a price for coal, but it takes into account, it looks over a 17, 18-month period, and it'll say, okay, these are the probabilities of burns. This is, at each coal plant, this is how much storage I have, the min and max, where I want to be. These are the deliveries I have coming in, and it optimizes that. Takes the price of coal and then it optimizes that within that construct, and will re-optimize it if it all of a sudden starts falling on either side of the range. And basically what it does is it gives a little adjustment to the coal price, and we adjust it once a week, and it helps us, in the long term, it helps the customers, it helps the reliability of coal supply, it'll help us manage our inventories, and it's something that's like proactive, and it's one of those things that we, the smart quant guys came up with, and it's worked for us, and we implemented it at the end of May, but we've been working on it for over a year because we realized that the coal market structure has changed. The price curve that's out there for the price of coal, if you want to go out and buy it today, that price does not reflect the reality of the coal market. So we had to do something, and that's why we were using the dynamic dispatch. It's not as liquid. It's a good way to say. So if you want to buy 10 trains, it might only be one.
I got you.
We have to
I think at least I think I do.
So we're just managing our burns, right?
So I'm going to ask a direct question. It may or may not make sense, but to you, it makes sense to me. If DECDP, maybe even Duke-wide, decided to burn more coal, made a strategic decision to burn more coal, would that reduce fuel costs, ultimately resulting in a lower monthly bill for a ratepayer?
It's hard to say what the price of coal is going to do in a constrained market. It's difficult. I know we could manage the procurement for sure. The difference between coal and gas too is gas you can financially hedge. Coal, you're buying a fixed price, tons. You have a certain amount of coal producers, and you can't guarantee. We do long-term contracts and things like that, but you can't guarantee the price for 10 years if that's what you're asking. That's hard to do.
And is it a fair statement to say that the market price of coal is just one factor into ultimate costs to burn the coal, considering coal ash and other factors that go into the full process of providing generation using coal? Is that fair to say?
It's fair to say.
It's not just the market price.
So in that economic dispatch model that you were talking about earlier, yes, there's of course a delivered price of coal, right, which includes railroads. Also in there is the heat rate. There's emissions costs. There's plant parameters, right, ramping up and down. Maybe it takes 12 hours to start. So there's a lot of different variables that go into that cost. So it's not just the price of coal, the delivered price of coal. And that is obviously stacked with all the other units and the hydro and solar and everything else. And that's how the model produces an hourly forecast of how we're going to dispatch those plants. And it goes out 7 days. And as you obviously get closer and the parameters change, the variables, the weather, things like that, unit conditions, D rates, that all goes into the model, and it's looked at by a lot of people every day.
Thank you very much for that thorough explanation. One last question. This is for the nuclear gentleman. Is there any way to increase nuclear capacity? I think it's with what you have, your current fleet now. I think I heard testimony that it's 48% of the generational mix. Is it a way to get more out of your nuclear fleet?
There are some opportunities that we're looking at. Really two things, Commissioner. One is some of our plants have 18-month fuel cycles. We are, as I mentioned earlier, looking at going to 24-month fuel cycles. So ultimately, you'd have fewer refueling outages, so you're making more power in the long run. The other aspect that we are looking at potential power up rates on a couple of our units. Not all of them, but some of them we have the capacity. So we're looking at anywhere from 65 to 70 megawatts on a number of our units. It's something we're still investigating and trying to weigh out. Is it the money that it would cost to modify the plants to be able to generate that additional power? Is it worth it relative to what other options may be down the road, like SMRs or gas, some of those things? But that group that I mentioned earlier around new nuclear, part of that group is looking at extending our fuel cycles to all 24 months, and we have several units that we're looking at to raise. Could we get an additional 65 to 70 megawatts out of?
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Houston, if that actually happens, would it change your opinion regarding the availability of fuel?
No, in fact, those are some of the considerations I was mentioning. We're keeping an eye on. We will need new fuel capacity. My point earlier was that I don't see that as being an insurmountable task to be able to build what we need by the time that we need it. Those are some of the market. I said the market would dictate supply demand. If enough generators commit to doing some of the things that Witness Emerald just mentioned, then those signals will be there, and the demand would then provide the business case for all those investments and things to be made.
Okay. And I mean, this is an obvious question. I think it's obvious, but I feel compelled to ask it. That new capacity, that 75 megawatts, would that fit into your clean energy goals? That power?
It would. I mean, just because it's additional clean energy, I wouldn't say it's the deciding factor, because ultimately, what we're looking at, I would say for some of our units, it looks cost effective. A couple of the initial reports coming in to upgrade these units, additional 70 megawatts, the additional cost to modify the plant does not look right now favorable relative to other options.
Right. And so to that point, I don't think, and maybe, I don't know if you can testify to this or not, if it's not cost effective, you wouldn't seek to implement it, would you?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Powers?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank y'all for your endurance there with Commissioner Williams. I'm trying to make things even a little simpler so I can understand. Mr. Simmel, when you say a longer term, I think we're basically saying less outages, then it would be cheaper fuel costs. That's pretty basic, isn't it?
Well, yeah, what we were saying, if we can extend, we have several of our plants that already operate on 24-month fuel cycles. We have about half the fleet that still operates on 18-month fuel cycles. So obviously, if it would save in outage costs, because we'd have less days offline, because we'd have less refueling outages, because we refueling every 24 months versus 18 months. So in the net effect, it would lower cost.
Yeah. Okay. And Mr. Houston, you made a good point, and of course I think we all knew it, but I think in your testimony you said that even if you face some higher cost in obtaining what you need as far as nuclear procurement, different things, it's still 6-7 times cheaper per kilowatt than using coal or gas. Is that correct?
I'm not as expert as my colleagues are on the cost for the coal and the gas and the fossil fuels, but the point being is that we do expect costs will go up just simply because we've enjoyed what I would call unsustainably low costs due to a lot of reactors, Japan, Fukushima, that happened like 2010-11 timeframe. There's been a lot of nuclear inventory overhang in the market that has kept prices relatively low. And as nuclear fuel producers look to build anew, inflation, they're dealing with the same things that we deal with in our day-to-day. They're dealing with inflation and the new costs that would be needed to go forward. It's going to be a little higher than where it has been in the past. So that was the overarching point that I was trying to make. But to your point, I think in the grand scheme of things, nuclear is still going to be competitive from a fuel cost perspective from what we think.
Okay. Well, and I think even Georgia's recent big investment, which of course cost more than they expected, it's still cheaper in the long run to the customer. Correct.
That's my understanding.
Okay. Between the two of you gentlemen, why or what is there any plan as far as building new nuclear plants or expanding the pie as far as what nuclear provides by Duke?
I would say relative to our current nuclear fleet, our plants are anywhere from 759 megawatts up to around 1,200 megawatts. I don't see any plans to build any plants of that size. As mentioned earlier, I think with Commissioner Williams, we are looking at the future relative to small modular reactors and the advanced nuclear technologies. I mean, obviously the small modular reactors, a lower cost relative to building something like that was just built down in Georgia, and from a timing standpoint, it would be built in a shorter time frame. We're looking, there's our friends up in Canada are currently building some of the small. They've announced they're building some of the small modular reactors. The government here in the United States, up in the Tennessee Valley area, has announced they're going to build small modular reactors. So we're plugged in and really watching what they do, see how it comes about from the ability to obtain the necessary materials, and then what the costs look like. So if we expand on our nuclear fleet, it would be towards small modular reactors and advanced nuclear technologies.
Well, and I'm aware of the time frame for the big units. What would be a time frame for a small nuclear reactor to get it built and online? Just a guess.
Yeah, I'm thinking. God, this is a guess. I'm thinking in the five-year time frame, and I can take a follow-up and confirm that up a little bit better.
So at least half the amount of time to build a big nuclear reactor.
Yes, it would definitely be much shorter and a lower cost.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McClay, not to leave you out of this, I think I've, over my lifetime, have learned a lot of hard lessons in the stock market about volatility and buying a stock and wondering why the devil does something happen over here affect the value of my stock when I know it really doesn't. And we've heard on several different occasions about Ukraine, Russia, that sort of thing. And I may be just asking the question in vain, but has anybody, with the big group you deal with and the big group even above that you buy and sell from, has anybody been able to quantify in any way what they feel the effect of this Ukraine situation has been on the gas market or on our market, period?
Yeah, not that I really know of, but like I said last year, any incremental amount of gas that was available to be converted to liquefied natural gas to be sent on overseas, the netbacks or the margins were incredible. So I'm sure that helped keep the market up. On the other hand, last summer there was also a fire at one of the facilities that helped keep 2 BCF a day that could not get processed in the market. So that's probably kept the market a little bit capped. That was helpful, even though the producers hadn't responded yet. So But to your question, I don't know of anybody that's done that analysis.
Another thing, and maybe immaterial, is I think the average person on the street, when they see gas prices going up, wonder why in the devil are we exporting it? Why aren't we taking care of ourselves first? But is that ever an issue that y'all deal with as far as should we cap exports or?
I think we do make enough gas in the U.S. and we could make more. There's plenty available. I think the infrastructure is more the issue of getting the gas to where it needs to go, and permitting and making sure that we have a long-term solution to get, especially if we want to burn more gas.
Okay. Well, thank y'all all three very much. That's all I have.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Carolee Williams.
Thank you, Chair Belzer. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your endurance in this. I have a few follow-up questions based on what my fellow commissioners have asked. And the first is that, Witness Emerald, you talked several times, you always talked about SMRs, and then you said advanced nuclear technology. What does advanced nuclear technology mean when you add that to your
Mr.
answer?
Houston may maybe have to help me out here, but
okay.
What's the small modular reactors? It's more of the, like the ones we've been looking at are the boiling water reactor types, which is similar to our Brunswick facility.
Okay.
The advanced nuclear technologies are some of the ones that are sodium cooled. Lot of different technologies that are being developed out there. There's like 8-10 different companies that are developing not the traditional. They're very passive systems. They operate at low pressures and high temperatures, or low temperatures and high pressures. But there's a number of different companies that are looking at those options that can be built. They'll take a lot smaller footprint, and they're anywhere from, I would say, typically 60 megawatts up to 300 and some megawatts that can be built in blocks in different areas. But we are certainly reaching out and working with different companies on what the opportunities are out there. But none of them have been built from a production standpoint. So there's still technologies that are being considered. And I would say right now we're primarily more interested in this SMRs because it's known technology. It's being utilized. And as I mentioned earlier, our friends up in Canada have made the decision that they're going to pursue that avenue for additional power.
Witness Houston, would you like to add anything?
No, from my perspective, I think Witness Emerald did a great job of describing it. Again, the way I try to break it down in layman's term is that the small modular reactors are more of the design that we're used to working with. They're just smaller. He also mentioned different fuel matrices that some of the advanced reactors are using different fuel types, whether it's a metal fuel instead of a ceramic that we operate right now, or liquid sodium. So I think he summed it up pretty well.
Thank you. That makes sense to me. From a cost perspective, in the future, should you all seek to pursue either of these options? Are they trending, something that would be competitive to what you're already doing or better?
Witness Emerald may have a better idea of that, but I'm not privy to the details of the economic parts of that right now at this point. We do get consulted on just what we think fuel would look like or need to look like, or what would need to happen from the refueling side of that, but I'm not privy to the economic part of it at this point.
From a fueling perspective, would it be comparable?
It would depend, it would perhaps be slightly more expensive for the small modular reactors because we may need a higher enrichment. Otherwise, everything would look very similar to the fuel that we buy now, just maybe at a slightly higher enrichment. And that might come with a marginal cost for that. A lot of licensing, a lot of work that would need to happen for that. The other fuel, the liquid sodium, those are a much different ballgame that would take a lot more studying, I think, on our part to be able to get comfortable with what that is or what that would look like.
I would just add, relative to the advanced nuclear technologies, I haven't heard the specific dollar amounts. I do know currently they are higher cost than say what we're paying right now to operate our current nuclear fleet. But with time and improved, I'd say, design, research, the expectation is the cost will lower over time, and particularly if folks start implementing a particular design and a common design, there's an opportunity for those costs to lower. But I have not heard any like exact comparison numbers from a dollar standpoint.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Simmerl, you talked about the 90.98% net capacity factor. Do you happen to know what that has been in the past?
I do not know the exact number. I think historically we've been greater than 90%, probably in the 90 to 93%. Again, I can take that as a follow-up and validate those numbers.
Okay, thank you. Witness McClay, you talked about inventories being 30% higher. Did I track that?
Yeah, so I'm talking about the U.S. Energy Information Association. They track the inventories of all the gas fields in the U.S. And this year, we exited the winter period with burning less gas because it was warmer. And right now we exit about 33% higher than we did the previous year. And now,
and we
meaning the U.S., right,
okay,
as a whole. And right now the U.S. is about 26% higher than last year.
Do you have data for Duke Energy progress?
We contract for some storage. We don't necessarily own storage, but we do contract for storage. We have two contracts, one up in Virginia for about 500,000, and we have one also down in Mississippi for about twice that. So we'll use that storage for operational reasons. So in other words, to help us balance our burns on the pipeline, so we can take out of storage or put into storage if we have excess gas or if we need additional gas on the weekends or something like that. So we use it. It's called a high turn salt dome storage. So we'll use it frequently. We'll put in and take out for operational purposes. Where if you had somebody like an LDC, for example, might fill it up in the summertime and then use it in the wintertime as they need it.
The only reason I ask is it sounded like there was excess inventory, and I realize now that was U.S.-wide, right. And I wondered if that was factored into, your expectation of the cost going forward. And it sounds like it, if I heard you right, it's more of a operational,
yes,
relatively minor role going forward.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So what is the role of no-cost sources of energy like hydro or solar when we have higher gas prices?
So do you mean, on a day-to-day basis, or do you mean just over time?
I think I mean over time, thinking about how you have looked at this past year's cost and how you're looking at costs going forward. And we've all kind of used this opportunity to learn a little bit more and think a little bit more about the future. So it's probably a tad out of the scope, but I'm building on your knowledge.
All right. Well, that's more IRP space for that type of thing. I will say that, obviously it supplements our burns, which is our load, which is good. And that, it does get into the unit dispatch. We often use hydro as a peak shaver, which is good as well, and we have plenty of it. So from that standpoint, it's very valuable. The intermittency of solar obviously is something you just have to work around. And I heard one of the commissioners talking about batteries, maybe supplementing, and other ways would be combustion turbines, right? Little expensive way to manage it, but sometimes if you have a lot of it on your system, right, you're gonna have to either back down energy or somehow if it goes offline, you need to supplement it. So there's all those things that you have to take into account, and we have teams that do that. And I might have input into that with fuel prices, but other than that, they're working on the analysis.
Okay. Going to get a little bit broader and ask the question about that I asked earlier, and that's really, we're talking about depth system-wide fuel cost. How, and this is just kind of a relatively new commissioner, just trying to understand how, when you've got something that, resources that are in both states, but then costs that you're coming to us asking for South Carolina residents to pay. At a big overall picture, how does that work? Or should I ask somebody else?
Maybe rates. Maybe Witness Harrington could help you with that one.
Okay. And finally, can anybody speak to the fuel cost associated with Winter Storm Elliott?
Well, from a nuclear perspective, I don't think that was a material impact from nuclear. Our timeframes and horizons for nuclear fuel purchasing are much less volatile than what Witness McClay has to work through. It's more strategic and longer term, and any potential, because we don't replace the whole fuel reactor core of fuel at any one given time. There are typical timing delays. If one cycle runs longer or shorter, that fuel gets carried over into the next cycle, and it just sort of offsets or has a delta impact on how much you need to buy for the next cycle. So from the nuclear perspective, I don't think from a expense rate perspective that had a material impact.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, for natural gas, I'll just say that we do plan for for spikes in energy usage as well as natural gas, obviously, and we do have hedging that helps us as well. Thankfully, there were no issues with fuel, fossil fuel over the peak, which is good. We had plenty of gas and coal, so that wasn't an issue. Obviously, there's the company is reviewing all of that, and they have best practices, and they've talked to other utilities as well, and they have I'm sure a list of things, improvement opportunities, and I know some of those in our area are in flight as well to help improve.
One of the challenges of sitting up here is you have to really admit your ignorance sometimes with your questions. But when I think about what you said, and I think what Witness Flanagan said earlier, it sounded like there was a need to purchase from elsewhere during Winter Storm Elliott. How does that relate to what you just testified?
Could you repeat that? A need to purchase?
Additional fuel.
Oh, I think power.
Okay.
Right. There were, and obviously, if all the units are running and you have the fuel, and then if you need additional supplemental power, then we would go and purchase the power, and that's what we did.
Got it. And there's And okay, and that I can understand that's not in the realm that you all can testify to. Is that true?
The power group is within the fuels group. So if you have a question, I might be able to help you.
Do you know what that cost?
I'm not really sure if, yeah, I do. I'm not
Okay.
sure if I'm supposed to say it, so I'll just, I know what we paid per megawatt hour for, on average from our, the PJM pool that we bought power from that was cut. So, am I okay to say that?
But
I don't want to go any further.
I think that there, Ms. Brown, you're getting pointed at. That's why I'm calling on you. There's a question here about this, and we need an answer. Now, how we get that, I don't know, but we want an answer.
Oh, I just know that
I
it's
know
under a
that there's a
docket.
confidential.
Yeah,
I think that one witness has filed something with a confidential designation on that because Duke said it was confidential.
Right.
It's my
Right. Then that's
recollection from a witness's testimony.
Chair Belzer, I think that when witness Harrington is on her panel, that she may be able to speak to some of the questions about the replacement power from Winter Storm Elliott.
Yeah, but this witness has been asked a question. He says he has an answer and he doesn't know if he can give it. That's where we are right now.
I understand that that's confidential information right now until the Winter Storm Elliott docket and the ORS's investigation is complete.
And I heard that, and I guess just to put a finer point on it, my question is that cost for power a part of what you're seeking to recuperate to recoup going forward? In this docket.
Witness Harrington probably has that answer.
This is why I don't like panels.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioners, I think that if we wanted to speak to that, we would probably need to go into confidential session.
I understand.
Thank you. No further questions. Appreciate it.
Sure. I think we will be addressing that with witness Harrington. So, thank you. Nothing further? Nothing further. Commissioners, further questions for this panel?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Urban?
Thank you. Commissioner Thomas, would you like to go ahead?
No, sir. Commissioner Urban, go ahead, please. It's easier
thank you.
here.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I want to commend you on your hedging program. Based on the testimony and evidence, it sounds like it's held down the increase in fuel cost very well over the years, and I'm impressed with how you've managed it. It's true that you think that it is beneficial in your overall operation to have a hedging program. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just to briefly summarize the issue, it would be because it helps in your in holding down ratepayer spikes, unexpected increases in rates. Is that one reason?
I'll say, as far as the fuel costs, it provides fuel cost certainty for the pieces that are hedged. And then, the unhedged pieces are the ones that obviously can move around. So, yeah, it does provide protection.
And that goes to your demand response needs and the whole system, right? I mean, it benefits the whole system as a whole.
I would say we do it's hard for me to say. I'm not really sure I know the answer to that.
Well, it seems to have worked during the review period. You didn't lose any money on the hedging program,
yes.
correct?
Correct.
In fact, you made a little money, and then over the life of the program, since 2006, I believe someone testified, you've not lost a substantial sum. You're kind of more or less broken even. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Right. We have lost money. Make that clear. It's less than the amount that we made this past year.
Right. And I believe this past year you said you made how many $1 million? 38 million?
38 million, correct.
Okay. That was savings that won't have to be passed along in fuel cost increases for ratepayers. Is that right?
That's correct.
So I also like your idea about what one of you were talking about with the future for our existing nuclear plants. I like the fact that you're going to pursue licensing of the plants. I believe that is certainly in the best interest of the system. And I think that you mentioned the possibility of expanding the capacity of some of the plants if it's cost effective. I believe there are 2 plants that you thought you might be able to do that with. Is that right?
We have three different facilities we're currently looking at, and they're all on the DEC side.
I won't go any further into that at this time. I wanted to ask you, at this time, isn't it true in the United States, there is no small module reactor in active service? There may be a pilot program paid for by the federal government, but there was no small modular nuclear reactor in service in the United States at this time, is there?
That's my understanding as well.
And it's most likely going to be years out before we know whether it's going to be a real winner, in the sense that we don't really know yet what the total cost will be. We don't know what the performance of the small modular reactors will be. There are a lot of unanswered questions right now. Wouldn't you agree with that?
There are, and as I mentioned earlier, one of the things we're closely watching is what Tennessee Valley Authority is going to do, and Ontario Power Generation. Both of those 2 companies have announced their plans to move forward with small modular reactors. So that is something that we're closely interested in and following to understand the potential benefits for Duke Energy.
Very good. So is it fair to say we're kind of in a wait and see mode with small nuclear reactors right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The spike in natural gas prices that we saw in 2022, when gas prices went from $2.50 to $9, if you hadn't had a hedging program, that all those that $9 gas would be passed on to ratepayers. Isn't that true?
We would have had to pay the spot price for gas for part of it, yes. Yeah,
that would have cost millions of dollars to pay $9 for natural gas, right, over and above what it would normally cost.
Correct.
Okay. So there were substantial savings during the review period for your ratepayers because you had a hedging program.
That's correct.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. No further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Thomas?
Thank you. So, Mr. Houston, the nuclear fuel inventory level, we've heard a lot over the last few years about some stuff that you mentioned, how much rushes involved and so on and so forth. What is, generally speaking, the inventory level for nuclear fuel? Is it like 6 months, 5 years, or what?
We don't characterize it in a time frame of years. Typically, one of the biggest drivers for what we look at in terms of inventory is being able to operate if we have a disruption in our largest supplier. So it can vary a bit with our portfolio coverage. If we've got fairly wide and diverse, call it very spread out supply makeup in the portfolio in a given period of time, then from our perspective, our perspective would be that we wouldn't necessarily carry as much inventory in that scenario as we would if we had a much smaller footprint with fewer suppliers in it. Really aimed at trying to look at being able to operate roughly, there is a time element, so roughly a year or so of interrupted supply from your largest expected supplier. But that amount could vary just depending on what that portfolio makeup looks like at a given time. We also take a big look at not just a year or a particular biggest supplier, but what else is really going on in the market at that point in time. If we know that supply is readily available and fairly liquid and easy to get at, we may be more comfortable with less inventory, because at the end of the day, more inventory means that there's a higher carrying cost that gets, pushed along to the ratepayer. So as we were looking at trying to minimize costs for the ratepayer, we're trying to have as little inventory as we think we prudently need. And that question of prudency really depends on are our suppliers reliable? What's the biggest one? What could we do? What other options we may have in the portfolio at a given time? So it is a variable that we watch, basically in our planning every year, and we revisit it as events in the market. Geopolitical has been one of the big ones we've kept an eye on here more recently, just to make sure that we've got upset situations covered.
Okay, thanks. So, Mr. Simwell, you were mentioning the refueling, and I think it was Mr. McClay said something about there are not people that really want to be involved in mining coal these days. So my question relates to the refueling and the talent that it takes to do that. And are there people that want to do that and they're hard to train, whatever? I'm just looking for where is that?
Yeah. So Commissioner Thomas, relative to our refueling outages, one of the factors that we put in, obviously, the plant can operate so long with the fuel, so that's how we build the schedules. But we also look to make sure we minimize the overlap between refueling outages, because we do share a lot of our own resources from one plant to another. I mean, that's cheaper for Duke Energy. That's cheaper for the ratepayers. But obviously, for our refueling outages, we do have to bring in a lot of contract workers. And I would tell you, over the last 5 years, do we have the amount of contract workers that we used to have? I would say no. I mean, it's gotten a little more challenging relative to identifying resources to support valve maintenance, pump maintenance. But one of the big things we do, as I mentioned earlier, is make sure that we schedule our outages, minimize overlap, because we send all of our Duke resources. They hold our Duke qualifications, know our standards and expectations. So that's a key piece for us, laying out our schedules to be able to maximize the use of our own people. And again, I mean, we've been able to meet all of our needs, reaching out with the other contract suppliers. And to date, I would say the market is a little smaller than it used to be, but we have not had any challenges in being able to complete all the work that we've intended to complete during a particular refueling outage.
Okay. So Mr. McClay, in the discussions about the hedging costs, are all administrative costs included in the discussions that we've been having? Are those included in are the administrative costs included in the costs that are covered by a fuel proceeding?
Yeah, yes, there's very little administrative costs. It's just time for, one of the traders or a couple of us to execute. We do over-the-counter type, so we'll talk to the big banks, and we don't pay a fee for that. It's just you're buying at market, so there's no broker cost or anything like that. So we do have the only other cost I could think of is maybe just our screen to view the prices, which is negligible.
Okay. And so let me ask about coal. And I think what I heard you say, over the last winter period, the coal prices went up significantly, again, based a lot on what was going on around the world. And my understanding also is that you used less coal during that time period. So then that would say to me that you have an inventory, a fairly large inventory of fairly high cost coal at this point in time. So I'm assuming then that it is higher cost based on what happened, and that those higher costs will end up going through a future fuel proceeding. Does that make sense?
We had a lot of contracted coal that we had contracted from previous years over different terms. So I'll say that we were fairly insulated from that. I think we purchased maybe a little bit of spot in March of last year, and that was before it really took off. So we managed what we had in the pile. We didn't have to add to it at high prices. So, yes, we do have more stuff, higher inventories than we did last year, but basically it's the same coal that we had contracted for.
Okay, thanks. That's all I had.
It's 1:15. Commissioners, are there any further questions of this panel? Okay, hearing none. Are you going to have any?
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask some questions, but I can wait till after.
All right, so that answers my question. Thank you. We're going to break until 2:30 over lunch break. Gentlemen, you're still under oath and can't discuss your testimony. You can talk about the ball game last night. You can talk about the weather. You can talk about next year. Just can't talk about your testimony with anybody or let anybody discuss it with you. Council, I need for y'all to be considering dates for proposed orders so that y'all can talk to Ms. Moser sometime this afternoon. And just need y'all to have that on your radar, please. And with that, we're going to break until 2:30. Thank you.